None of the content on this or any episode of the Kratom Science Podcast, Kratom Science Journal Club, or on any page of kratomscience.com is intended, nor should it be considered, medical claims or medical advice. This is the Kratom Science Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Gallagher, blog and social media writer for kratomscience.com, your source for all things Kratom. My guest is writer and human rights advocate Morgan Godvin. Morgan spent 5 years incarcerated on a felony drug conviction. After her release, she graduated college and now works as engagement editor for JSTOR Daily's American prison newspapers and serves on multiple boards overseeing drug policy in Oregon. Her recent piece in Filter is called Kratom Helps Me Cope with Life, So What's the Problem? Thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing going through all your content. It's awesome stuff. You're a great writer, and yeah, all quality and tons of it. And you're involved in a lot of organizations: BARD Prison Initiative, Health and Justice Action Lab, Beats Overdose, which is I was a musician, so that one's I'm glad to hear of that. And JSTOR.
JSTOR Daily is that's my employer. Yeah, that's who pays my bills, because volunteering does not pay the bills. I love my job. It's super nerdy. Like, when I was a kid, I'd get picked on for being a nerd. And then now that I just embrace the nerdiness, and I'm almost cool now for how nerdy I am. Eventually
it'll come around and
right?
You'll be cool. I don't know which one I am now. Tell me about that American prison newspapers. It was a cool archive. That's the one I was like, oh, that job would be cool, because I'm a writer too. Yeah, tell me about that a little bit. I was looking at the St. Patrick's Day article.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I put that one together really quick. I just went to search St. Patrick's Day. So my job, I have to do a lot of different things for the job. So there's the primary source archive, where it's, we got 1,600 issues of newspapers produced in prison by and for incarcerated people. They span all the way from the 1800s to now. So there's this huge range of time and states from all over the country. And you just see these firsthand contemporary accounts of shifts through history and policy and just the breadth of humanity. So my job is to find really cool stories buried within that archive and get them written about in a way that's more easily digestible, because not everybody has time to go read, prison newspapers for a few hours. But when I find a really cool human story in there, I pull it out. I feel like I'm like an archaeologist and I'm excavating it out of the earth.
Yeah.
It's cool. And so, that's how I get them written about. I, use freelancers. Sometimes I write my own features. I help other journalists and academics if they're searching for something in particular for their work, for a story or a book that they're writing or a class that they're teaching. I'm the little search troll. And so I go into the archive and I try to find what they're looking for. It just means that all day, every day, I am reading and writing about mass incarceration. And I know I'm super sick because I love my job.
Yeah.
That's how I know. There's my sign. Yeah.
So you have a really amazing story and background, and you write extensively about it and spoken about it. I guess do you want to give a little rundown?
Yeah, for sure. So, born and raised in Portland, Oregon. I did the whole OxyContin to heroin pipeline thing back in the late aughts when that was all the rage. And then I ended up, a victim of the war on drugs. Mm-hmm. So getting arrested over and over. Technically, they called it drug court, which was supposed to be a softer, kinder, gentler alternative to incarceration. But it was the same thing. It was just rebranding. I ended up in jail over and over. For the first time in my 5-year addiction, that's when I lost my job. I went to jail too many times. I got fired. And that just decimated my life, really accelerated my addiction. Because we know that employment and being stably housed, these are the protective factors against deterioration. Mm-hmm. And I lost those. And then I ended up being the one who sold a gram of heroin to my best friend, and he overdosed and died off of that. And I was indicted for drug delivery resulting in death. I faced a 20-year mandatory minimum sentence in prison. I had a lot of mitigating factors. I was in the military. I was an EMT. I'm white and I'm middle class. And unfortunately, our justice system is so perverse that matters. Mm-hmm. And I was very fortunate to only get 5 years in prison.
Mm-hmm. You joined the Air Force when you were 19 and you got injured in basic training. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a super corny story. It's really embarrassing. So, yeah, I got injured in basic training and I got prescribed, morphine at the hospital, Percocet for 30 milligrams of Oxy for 30 days. And so I like to let people, especially when I first got out of prison and I was running up against so much stigma from addiction and prison, I let people think that I was one of those, quote, innocent victims of the opioid crisis. But that's such bullshit. It's so untrue. I had done drugs long before I ever joined the military. It was just random coincidence that I ended up getting prescribed opioids. But getting discharged from the Air Force did devastate me because my mom served in the Air Force for 20 years. I was like following in her footsteps. It was the first thing I'd ever done with my life that I could be proud of. And then I ended up right back home. Not even 2 months later, had to walk back into Pizza Hut and grovel for my job back. It was so embarrassing. And within a few months of that, I was addicted to heroin. I couldn't surmount the depression, the hopelessness for my future.
Wow. You're actually the second woman I've had on the podcast who was injured in basic training and
No way.
Had an opioid addiction after that, which eventually got to Kratom.
That's so funny. That is so wild.
Yeah, her name's Jennifer Van Blanc. She's from Philly, but her story was particularly great, and she was like had all kinds of tips about how to get off subs and get on Kratom. She had a whole method.
I didn't have to do all that because I just went to prison and cold turkeyed it.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you about somebody else. Have you ever heard of Bethany Hallam? I
don't think so.
Okay, she's a local, I'm in Pittsburgh, and she's a Allegheny County, that's Pittsburgh County councilwoman, and she's in her 20s, and she ran on the fact that...
She follows me on Twitter. I recognize this now.
Yep. She ran on the fact that she ran her election campaign on the fact that she was addicted to opiates and she was incarcerated, and now that jail is awful, and now her big issue is the Allegheny County Jail. People die in there all the time. It's just, so she's on the oversight board and she's like super tough about it, like, and it's awesome. I was like so happy to vote for her, but I just wanted to mention her. But
the world is changing, right? Could you imagine that even 5 years ago?
Oh God, no.
Right, like, I mean, the job I have now with JSTOR Daily, like, they let me just like get up and be like, I've been to prison and prison is an injustice. And it's like an academic institution. It's the world has changed.
I mean, do you think it's part of the reason is like so many people are going to prison now? Like, we have such a huge population. It's not, you can't, like a white middle class guy like me just can't forget that, because
that only happens to those people over there, the bad people. No. So and then same thing with the overdose crisis, which is why we're going to see like a pretty radical shift in our approach to the war on drugs. It's because it's reached a magnitude never before seen in human history. Like 105,000 people died last year. How many loved ones did they leave behind? About, at least 5 probably. So we have 500,000 Americans grieving a loss in 1 year alone. Once you reach that level of saturation, you can't ignore it anymore.
A lot of people ascribe that to the CDC guidelines not really helping, and doctors afraid to prescribing to like even chronic pain patients, and people being declared drug seekers by their doctors.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is that. Let's just walk it back. When I was 18 and using oxys, that was a safe supply. When I bought an 80 milligram Oxycontin, that was exactly 80 milligrams of actual Oxycontin, right? There was no contamination. There was no dosage variability. So there was no way for me to overdose because we were dosing correctly, specifically, accurately. And me doing those 80 milligram oxys, that was the last time I had anything resembling a safe supply. So when they choked out the pain medication, it severely impacted chronic pain patients, right? Who were immediately started to be treated like criminals. They conflated, physical dependency with addiction. Horrible, horrible, horrible. But not only did it affect chronic pain patients, it affected the whole drug supply, because it just totally dried up anything resembling a safe supply. So we all turned to heroin, and then heroin slowly became fentanyl. And now we've got these blues and these counterfeit pills that look like Xanax and Oxys, but are actually fentanyl. And kids are dying off those in record numbers. Youth. I have a paper coming out on April 12th that talks about this horrific tragedy.
Where's that going to be out at?
That's in JAMA. That's academic.
I'll look for that. I always ask people this, but do you want to talk about why you think you got addicted to drugs? A lot of people, it's a lot of people's childhood trauma or even adult trauma.
I had 5 years to sit around in jail and prison and think about why I had gotten addicted to drugs. And I'm not a typical case. And I understood that from the very first time I went to drug rehab when I was 21. And the people around me all had suffered either like a premature death of their parent or sexual trauma. And I didn't relate to that. I hadn't had any of these like egregious traumas. And so I never fully understood why I did drugs. I used to say I did drugs because they were fun until they weren't anymore. But then once I got to jail and prison, I could think about this a lot more clearly. The first time I tried to hang myself, I was 11 years old. So that's indicative of a pretty deep problem, mental health problem. I was raised, I had two moms way, way before that was acceptable socially. My parents were gay, except my mom was in the military. So we had to hide the fact that that was my family structure and that my mom was gay. That's even before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And Don't Ask, Don't Tell wasn't that much better. And so I always sort of lived this fractured life, right? There was like a public presentation and a private presentation that was always different. And then there was extreme violence that occurred in my house, constant domestic violence and turmoil. I would hear my other friend, kids in school be like, oh my God, I'm so distraught. My parents are divorcing. And I'm like, oh my God, I would pay money for my parents to divorce. Could they please get divorced? They weren't technically married because gay marriage wasn't allowed back then. But you know what I mean? I just wanted them to separate because all they did was fight. And I had to deal with that. And I started to learn that I just wanted to disappear. I didn't want to exist anymore. I couldn't control my circumstances around me. And I didn't like my circumstances, but I couldn't change them. And so on some deep subconscious level, I just started to want to stop existing. And so I started fantasizing a lot about suicide. I remember sitting down when I was 13 years old and writing out this scrawling suicide note. I was finally going to do it. I didn't do it. I never did it. And so I just had these extreme mental health problems, depression, anxiety. I never did any extracurricular activities. I didn't have friends, but my parents were so embroiled in their own conflict that they couldn't really deal with me or my social problems or my anxieties. And I just learned to make myself scarce, stay out of the way, entertain myself. And then by the time I'm 16 years old and I start doing cocaine, my pediatrician goes, oh yeah, it's definitely the cocaine that's your problem. You're going to need to stop using cocaine. And I just remember thinking wait, what? The cocaine's new. I've been having problems. And drugs were fun. Yeah, it was a relief. It was finally a little reprieve from the impending doom, that oppressive cloud of darkness that had followed me since I could remember.
There's this whole idea that, addiction and originates in the drug, and they're inherently evil substances, and even the term calling a drug addictive is kind of a fallacy to me, because I shouldn't even say this on the podcast because my cousin will be over here in 5 minutes, but my wife had pain medication for 4 years ago, and I think that we still have a pill floating around. That didn't make us addicted to opiates. Yeah,
I don't understand why people imbue inanimate objects, they anthropomorphize them as if drugs could even be evil. They're not alive. They're not sentient beings. That's like saying a chair is evil.
Yeah. You were clean from opiates since you've been in prison, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I quit using when I was in jail. I used for the first year I was in jail. That was real miserable. I learned a lot about myself and my addiction. Finally got the resolve to quit. And 8 years ago this week, I asked the judge to transfer me out of that jail and into the jail that had no drugs for that exact reason. And that's when I stopped.
Okay, so let's get the Kratom here.
Yeah.
So that was a great article. It's in Filter Mag. I'll link everything. So when did you start using Kratom, and or when did you start hearing about it?
I mean, I've been hearing about it. I remember this one time I was trying to kick heroin with my girlfriend at the time, and I went to the head shop and I bought some Kratom because I heard it was like good for that. But I wasn't connected enough. I wasn't like on Reddit. I didn't know what to do. I didn't take enough. Like, it was dumb.
Yeah.
But like I've been hearing about it. But then like 2 years ago, last January, I'm in Venice Beach at this super bougie farmer's market, or I'm not like Marina Del Rey with all these like rich people. And there's this dude selling Kratom, and I'm like, oh, I should try that again. Like I remember hearing about this when I was addicted, and I bought some and I really liked it. I didn't know how much to take. And I remember liking it. And then I like bought some online, but I made the fatal mistake of taking too much the first time that I took it, and I got the wobbles, and I was like, well, this is some bullshit. I'm never doing this again.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what it was that made me. So like, I came back into the States. I moved back to the States. I tried to get my Xanax prescription continued. They weren't having it. I'm a person with an addiction history. So therefore, any substance that enters my body, and it's the weird anthropomorphizing of drugs as if Xanax were evil. And I am incapable of controlling my behaviors because 8 years ago I did heroin.
Yeah.
But my mental health really tanked. And so I started getting really suicidal again, really bad, real scary. And for the first time, not actually wanting to kill myself, but realizing that I was maybe going to. And that might sound weird, but it's like, but there was a part of me that didn't actually want to, and another part of me that was going to do it.
Wow.
And at that point, I was researching online on Reddit about this, and I saw a whole bunch of people using Kratom for their mental health, for depression and suicidal ideation. And I gave it another shot, started with a smaller dosage, and immediately realized that I had found a miracle drug.
Having said that, you also said, let me read the quote, Kratom does cause physical dependency, and that can be downplayed by its advocates.
I don't know why people have to be such extremists. Like, it's all good or it's all bad.
Yeah.
No, bro. No, it's got pros and cons like everything else in life. In fact, right now, I wish I wasn't dependent on Kratom. It's pissing me off because I want to travel this summer in some countries I'm going to. It's a prohibited substance. And because I have a drug trafficking, history on my record, I'm highly scrutinized at international borders. So there's no way I'm traveling with it. So I'm going to have to get off it. And that's giving me anxiety, I'll be honest.
So can you talk about your experience with tolerance, like how you build it up and how you, like you said, you take tolerance breaks, right?
Yeah, totally. So, I started with figuring out my therapeutic dose was about 1.5 grams. I'm 6 feet tall, so I'm pretty big. So 1.5 grams was reasonable. And then it creeps, right? And I'm familiar with opioids. I know this drill. Like, I've been here before, but obviously it's like the most mild case of it when compared to actual opioids. But, I am familiar with how tolerance builds. And so I caught my dose creeping, the same dose wouldn't do the same thing. But when my single dose gets up to 4 or 5 grams, that's when I know it's time to chill it. It's super arbitrary. I just make up rules that I live by. I've been doing this since I was in jail and prison. I just make up these really overly rigid, strict rules and then impose them on myself. And so when my dose gets up to 4 grams, I will start dosing down. I try to wait longer in between my doses. I'll get down to 1 or 2 grams a day over the course of about a week, stay at that for a few days, and then get back up. So that's my tolerance breaks don't get down to nothing. They get down to 1 or 2 grams, especially right before bed, because otherwise I have trouble sleeping.
I mean, that seems like a very moderate amount to me. I mean, I just had tea this morning with 4 grams, but I'm not a daily consumer. I don't do it multiple times. I actually haven't had Kratom in like a month.
I regret sometimes I made a very conscious decision to start taking it every day, because if you decide that, you have to follow through with it. You have to take it every day. Otherwise, you're going to experience withdrawal. And I did that back in November, and sometimes I wish I wouldn't have.
Since we're on withdrawals, if you could compare like a heroin withdrawal to a Kratom withdrawal.
Yeah, it ain't shit. Can I say that? I can try different words. Yeah, it's nothing. Some of the physical symptoms are quite similar, but that all-consuming dread, anxiety, general malaise, and discomfort that comes with opioid withdrawals, it doesn't match. So yeah, sure, my eyes are watering, my nose is runny. The not sleeping is really shitty, actually. I really don't like the part that it takes me a long time to fall asleep. But like if I'm up and moving around, I don't even really notice it. I'm like, oh yeah, my eyes are kind of watering, my nose is running. That is nothing like heroin withdrawal, because the eyes running, the eyes being watery and the nose running is the most physical symptom of heroin withdrawal, but really it's what you're feeling internally that is devastating you, right? Like these outward presenting symptoms are trivial when compared to what you're feeling internally. And that's not what happens with Kratom, is you get mostly these outward presenting symptoms that are mildly uncomfortable or annoying, but you don't get that all-consuming sense of dread.
And you said upon stopping your Kratom use, you said, I do feel depressed and suicidal, but is that from withdrawal or simply a return to baseline? So I'll put the question to you.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think sometimes I convince myself that I need the Kratom, and I am so convinced of that, I make it become true emotionally, that without it, I think, oh, all this anxiety is because I don't have the Kratom. And then it becomes true. But really, that was just a fleeting moment of anxiety that would have passed had I not affixed it in my mind to the need to take another dose of Kratom. And I actually think even in heroin addiction, a lot of my perception was false. It was like I created a false reality of what was existing in my body and in my mind. And I remember thinking that this one time I got out of treatment, and I was like, wow, my addiction is just the externalization of all my internal emotions. Like it's me projecting my emotions onto external objects, and then which gives me the illusion of control, because it's like, oh, this anxiety actually just means I need to take another dose. And once I do that, my anxiety will go down. And because I believe that, it becomes true. A similar thing happens with my Kratom to a lesser extent, much lesser extent. I mean, I'm suicidal half the time anyway. Even when I take Kratom, it's just like slightly calming. So like all things, it's both. My baseline is pretty low, and coming off of Kratom, a little bit of withdrawals will push me towards maybe higher anxiety and depression, which therefore pushes me to more suicidal ideation. But some of that is just me convincing myself that I've grown to need the Kratom, and that without it, I'm worse off. And that's not real, though. And I notice it because I'll forget to dose sometimes, and as long as I'm busy, I don't even notice it. I just forget.
Yeah, I mean, I've even talked to daily users that say, I went on vacation and I forgot to bring it, and I was cool.
Yeah. It's so much of it's mental. Much of addiction and dependency is so mental. If we just don't hyper focus on the uncomfortable symptoms, we could forget that they're there. They're not. It's so mild. You
even talked in the article about case reports that you looked at. The studies, with few exceptions, the Kratom studies are retrospective. Inherent negative bias. No one walks to the emergency department to tell you that Kratom cut their pain in half.
Yeah. I was trying to design a research study for Kratom, thinking maybe using trawling of social media and Reddit if I got permission from the mods or something, because there's so much positive benefit that's evident to me when I collect a very large sample size of Reddit posts. So many different health and mental health benefits are being provided to people taking it. Yet when I go to the academic literature, there's almost nothing. I saw this one study that used firsthand accounts from Erowid, back when that was a thing?
Yeah, Dr. Swagger did that one. I've had him on the podcast. And you know what? They were working on all kinds of new stuff. I have a contact, Kirsten Smith in NIDA. She's a former heroin user, and she works in NIDA now, which is awesome.
That's crazy.
And they're working on, they have provided like $7 million in research on Kratom, and they're really Kratom positive. They just updated their Kratom page.
Wow.
So, and she's in there
That's
working
impressive.
on it. Yeah, I have had her on the show before, and I just set up another interview.
I'm glad that there might be some research coming down the pipeline that shows its medical benefit, because, we got some state legislators here trying to say it has no medicinal value and scheduling at a Schedule 1. And that's like, tell me you've never taken Kratom without telling me you've never taken Kratom. You're like, Schedule 1 substance,
Oh
no
my
medicinal
God.
value. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Clearly you have no idea what you're talking
Let's
about.
Schedule 1 something that's like a partial opioid agonist, and just mix it in there with the awesome illicit market supply.
Totally. Sounds like this is a great plan, y'all.
Yeah.
It's just so mild.
Yeah.
It's just such a mild substance that
Like,
it is not intoxicating. It's not impairment.
Yeah, no, not at all. Like, I just had some. I'm feeling good.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I can't do this interview.
Right. No, it helps me get my work done, honestly, because sometimes my anxiety, depression gets so bad, I get paralyzed. I have a hard time moving through my projects. And Kratom is such a good tool in that way if I take it, and it just gives me this sort of like boost of energy. And maybe the energy is just coming because my anxiety is reducing. I don't know. But it really helps me be a better professional, be a better productive member of society. And then to hear senators trying to ban it as if it was some like wild intoxicant that was ruining my life is so weird.
Was that just in the state of Oregon?
That's Kentucky. No, Oregon just passed a regulatory bill.
Yes, I was just going to bring that up. Yeah. Yesterday they just passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, and it's actually a good one too, because it actually has an enforcement money allocated for enforcement. Some of these states, the law's just there just in case somebody sells a bunch of crap and they can go in and bust them. But the Oregon one actually has an enforcement arm where processors are going to be regulated. They're going to be designated processors, and they're going to have to go through a clean, good manufacturing practices thing. So everybody that distributes, even everybody that distributes it, is eventually going to have to get it from processors who are licensed. So it's going to be clean stuff.
Is that going to affect my ability to buy it online from my
I don't know. I don't think so. So. I haven't looked at it too closely, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. So what kind of Kratom do you use? There was a picture of the crushed leaf in your article.
That was a weird picture. I don't know why they chose that. Nobody asked for my input on what image to use.
Okay.
Yeah. Honestly, I mostly buy pre-filled capsules. And people are like, oh, but it's more expensive. But like, I used to spend $180 on heroin every 2 days. So really spending 25% more for capsules does not faze me.
Yeah.
My use is still less than $1 a day. I use green strains mostly.
Okay.
I've read a lot about the strains. I'm super intrigued by it. Personal experiences I know that they're the same. I know that it's the same plant. It's not actually like a different plant. I get it. And I feel like when I take whites, I get more anxiety. People argue about this online at length.
Yeah, and that's kind of why we need like alkaloid profile. Like cannabis has all the cannabinoids on the side. There's just not the infrastructure, the lab infrastructure to do that yet. But it'll get rid of the whole idea of the strains, because then you'll know how much of an alkaloid you're getting. But they're still down at University of Florida School of Pharmacy trying to figure out exactly what the alkaloids even do. They're going to be starting human clinical trials, and it was interesting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think eventually, like, I don't know, it's not like coming up, but they're getting close to them, which will be awesome. They want to develop a opioid addiction treatment drug from whatever combination of alkaloids is the best combination. Mitragynine in itself, it hits on those mu-opioid receptors, which you mentioned in your article, but it also hits on other receptors that might further be protective. Even that one alkaloid does. Dr. Sharma, who I was talking to, it has like 4 different the effects of 4 different opioid treatment drugs. He said that are commonly used. He said, for 6 months, I hesitated to share publicly that I used this substance. So why did you hesitate?
Well, I am appointed to multiple state government positions as a person in long-term recovery. I represent a highly prestigious academic institution in my job. I didn't want to bring them any negative press or trolling on Twitter. I didn't want people to expel me from my government positions by accusing me of not being a person in recovery. And yeah, just that internalized stigma of like, oh, am I an addict? Like, do I need this to survive? Am I less than? Am I subhuman? Is there something wrong with me? Am I deficient? Because I consume a substance, no matter how mild. And I know that that's ridiculous, but that's where I was at. And then I just started realizing, I don't know, I lived my whole life like a political campaign, like as if I had secrets, you could blackmail me with them. And so I just am super honest and transparent. And it's like I said, like when I used to try to conform to societal norms, like to fit in, I ended up not fitting in for whatever, just because I'm a weirdo. But now that like my brand is, I do not conform to societal norms, I am a weirdo, all of a sudden I have like really broad acceptance across multiple spheres of society. And that's weird. I think we're just in a transition point in U.S. public perception. Yeah. And I just I don't want to keep it a secret. They were talking about banning it, and I work in drug policy. So like, y'all want to talk about banning it? Listen to my experience first, And so I shared it publicly because so many of my friends have died from fentanyl, heroin before that. If there's another tool in our toolbox to stave off mass death, why don't we use it?
Yeah, absolutely. And just so many people I've heard from that said it's saved my life. I mean, like a vendor might use that to promote it or something, but we have gotten so many comments. I have like 230 pages. I can email it to you. It's like a file of 230 pages of comments and then I hashtagged all of them. This is my 2020 COVID project, and but it's all from our site, and it's in a PDF file. I can email it to you, but you can go through it with a hashtag. But it's just thing after thing after thing, and it's never anybody being like, oh, we got so ripped on Kratom. It's like nobody. It's like nobody like that. It's people who have chronic pain. The average age is like 45. I'm 45.
Oh, fascinating.
Or like 40 to 45, or 35 to 45. A lot of old people use it. So Oregon has drug decriminalization now. Can you talk about what that's like? Is there a noticeable change? Are people who use drugs like relieved?
Yeah, so I got to volunteer on the Yes on Measure 110 campaign, and then pretty much to everyone's surprise that passed, like by a landslide. And then I got appointed to the Oregon Health Authority to be one of the 21 people that oversees the implementation of drug decriminalization in Oregon. It's pronounced Oregon. I know it's spelled funny, but Oregon, just like a piano or your liver, same thing. So drugs were decriminalized on February 1st, 2021. So we just celebrated the 1-year anniversary. People who use drugs are relieved, but it took 50 years of the war on drugs for police to become feared as the enemy, because police decided, hey, all you people who use drugs, you're my enemy, and I'm going to try to arrest you. Like it was a game. So police decided that people who use drugs, we followed suit. It's going to take a long time to undo those wounds, right? To heal all that trauma.
Yeah.
But there is a collective sigh of relief that we're breathing here, because at least you won't go to jail for possession.
Yeah.
And That is enormous. And so now what we're doing, the next part of that is using all our cannabis tax revenue, which is about $300 million per budget cycle, to infuse that into a substance use treatment system. So harm reduction and overdose prevention, peer mentoring, outpatient, Suboxone, methadone. And so we're giving out that money right now. And it's just so like the drug war has come full circle. Meanwhile, across the border in Idaho, they still have some of the most punitive cannabis laws in the country. And over here, we're selling it, taxing it, and funneling that money back into communities. It's like, what are y'all doing?
Oh, man, that's such a good policy. I'm like fantasizing about it in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, we have Philly, Pittsburgh, where I am, and then we have Pennsylvania, so nothing cool can get past. We have medical here, though. We have medical, so I call a guy up, say I have anxiety, I get my card, so it's all good. At
least you have that. You know, Pennsylvania is the worst state in the country for drug-induced homicide prosecutions.
Oh, really?
By far. Yeah, Ohio's number 2. So they send more people to prison under that drug delivery resulting in death statute than any other state. It doesn't help at all. And they don't use it to prosecute like kingpins or actual dealers. They mostly use it for the person who was with the person who died or the person who last saw them. You know, it's just like the lowest hanging fruit. Who's easiest to find is the friend. Like I've seen cases out of Pennsylvania where like the best friend gets sent up for 15 years, or the one brother dies and the other brother goes to prison for the overdose. And then the mom is grieving the loss of 2 sons, one to death and one to prison. Yeah, Pennsylvania is a weird place. That's all I got to say. You got some very interesting policies. And then I see like Philly on Twitter, and I'm like, how is this the same state of like the hyper punitive policies? I don't get it.
Yeah,
I've never been.
Yeah, oh, Philly's cool. Pittsburgh's cool too. That was like an injustice. I mean, you made a video of somebody that trolled you and said, oh, you should have got life in prison. And it's based on a kind of, I would say, after school special, but that's an over 40 reference, I think, but like a fear-based idea of a drug pusher, and instead you just happen to have more heroin at the time. Yeah, so that sucks. It pisses me off. Thank you for telling me. Pennsylvania is so bad about that. Do you have any thoughts about, okay, so we have you to have decriminalization now, so what about maybe the path to legalization? What do you think like a legalized heroin would look like?
So I am not confident in our hyper-capitalistic society to legalize heroin properly. So when I say legalize, I mean somewhere in between medicalize and legalize, because I want a well-regulated industry that is not aggressively advertising to people. Because I'm disappointed at least in the state of Oregon, on how we handled weed legalization. Why are there so many billboards about buying weed? Like, weed sells itself. You don't need to sell it like that. And it's just like in plain view of kids walking by. And I just don't approve of it. Like, I think people should do all the drugs that they want to do, like to do drugs to your heart's content. But marketers should not be gaming people's psychology to try to convince them to do more drugs. That's where I draw the line. Yeah,
you get rid of alcohol commercials too, because I'll still drink.
Right. Sell themselves. Word of mouth. And so if we were going to legalize, I would want it highly regulated, honestly, like at least like strict prohibitions on marketing and advertising. And it's still, the drug is dangerous, man. I had friends overdose and die off of strict heroin long before fentanyl. A lot of that's because they didn't know the dosage they were using, which would be alleviated under a regularization scheme. But drugs themselves still hold some inherent risks, right? Ask an alcoholic if they feel empowered because they can buy their booze at the liquor store. Probably not. Like, there's still, addiction itself still has some inherent dangers, which is just why I want to see a system of regulation that boosts the safety of use, so that people are making fully informed, consensual decisions about what they're putting into their body, why, when, how often, how much, and that is not being influenced by late stage capitalism.
Yeah, I like what that group's doing in Vancouver with the little black and white boxes, heroin, coke, meth.
That's perfect. Like that style of distribution, where you're not targeting new customers, right?
Yeah,
We're not
yeah.
trying to create new customers out of somebody who just turned 18 or just turned 21.
Yeah.
But we're trying to help people who are already, in the black market, which is now super toxic, live safer and healthier lives. Or, if someone's super suicidal and drugs would help them with their mental health, let them, like, opioids are wonderful antidepressants, honestly. Like for a lot of people that have treatment-resistant depression, I think they could probably use opioids as long as they had a safe and regulated supply.
Yeah, I mean, people take them because they work.
Right, exactly. People get addicted to them because they work. They work super well, in fact. And unlike most other drugs, opioids are not inherently toxic to the human body. Long-term use doesn't cause problems as long as it's pure and not contaminated.
Yeah, that's the thing with, I mean, the Kratom market is unregulated enough as it is. It's either regulation or the Wild West with like these vendors some of them don't give a shit already about contamination. So that's why making a tea is sometimes safer if you get Kratom that you don't really know, because it'll at least sterilize the contaminants. And I like tea. I recommend tea too. I have a friend who has a company that just sells tea bags of Kratom, and I just recommend that too because it's kind of like more of a ritual, and you have to take your time to get there. So maybe it'll be like it depends on the individual, but it'll be like more of a buffer between. And then you had your tea. It takes like 30 minutes to steep, and if you're just drinking tea, then it'll take you another 30 minutes to make the next one. So I don't know. I don't know if that would work for everybody,
but the taste. Why does it gotta be so nasty?
I'm used to the tea.
I can't do it.
Tea and lemon. I used to put honey, but I gave up sugar, so I just do tea and lemon, and I didn't mind it. I just wanted to talk about that video again you did with the life in prison lady. You said you thought it might have been a grieving parent. We are getting that in the Kratom community because a lot of the times the kids, like the one kid had a heart condition and he had a lot of Kratom. The other kid appeared to just have a lot of Kratom, but it's one of these death by misadventure things where they just eat a ton of it, and they're usually young men. It totally fits the profile of somebody that wants to do quote-unquote heroic doses. Do you have ways of, I mean, I don't know, I know you're a writer and communicator. Do you see any way to communicate with a grieving parent to let them know that prohibition's more harmful?
So I'm working on this messaging right now. We're very concerned because we're releasing that paper on April 12th about youth overdose, and it had to be really short. So literally all it says is youth overdose is increasing. So how are parents going to respond to that? Well, we already know. Right? That it's going to be these like super punitive, put them all in prison. But that's just because parents have never been shown another way. They were born, right, as during the tough on crime era, or came of age during the tough on crime era.
Just say no. I'm 45, so I grew up with Nancy Reagan on TV, all kinds of after school specials, like I said. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like reflexive now. Because literally we were taught for 50 years that incarceration is the solution to our problems. It was never true, and it's never been more untrue than it is now. But the response of that is like reflexive at this point. No one's thinking critically about it. No one's like, oh, wait, but the war on drugs dovetailed with the worst overdose crisis in human history. Maybe that's not the solution, like also like mass incarceration peaked in the 2000s. It's just so silly. But so I'm working on my messaging for this right now. Parents are really concerned that decriminalization sends the wrong message, or like any sort of safer use strategies, harm reduction messaging is, quote, sending the wrong message about drugs. I'm a lot more worried about sending kids to their graves than I am sending the wrong message. We should do everything in our power to avert preventable death, which overdose very much is. So people take that prohibition as like an ideological stance, like they die on this ideological hill of prohibition, and meanwhile in reality kids are literally dying. And so I keep ideology out of it. We know what works. We have empirical research that shows what works, and it's not criminalization. So let's do what works.
I asked everybody this, but do you have a doctor that you could talk to about kratom use?
No.
Yeah.
I would be super afraid of that. A friend of mine told their doctor, and they panicked and said, "Oh my God, that stuff is poison. It's worse than Suboxone. You're going to have to get on Suboxone to get off of that," which is wild. And so I learned in that moment, probably don't tell anyone. People fear what they don't understand, right? We fear abstract concepts. It's very rare that we fear tangible things before our eyes, because then it's real and we can see it. But the potentiality of an abstract threat is so great that people are terrified of it. And so I just, I keep it to myself, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
I wish that I could, I don't like secrets, but literally I can't tell the truth. You have not created an environment where I can tell the truth without being punished.
Yeah, that sucks. And another thing about the doctors, they're probably reading those case reports, if anything. They're not going to read pharmacological papers, or, I mean, some of them might, or social science. I don't even know if that's a true statement, but they're, in general, they'll probably just listen to the FDA on anything, and the FDA decided it's bad.
Because I think kratom holds wonderful medicinal value, helping people transition from fentanyl to Suboxone, which is currently a really rife time. It holds so much medicinal value. I wish that doctors could be more receptive to it, but there isn't that peer-reviewed literature for them to read so that they can be receptive to it in an ethical way.
Yeah, and actually there is, that just came out. Dr. Swager and Dr. Smith, Kirsten Smith, who I mentioned before, they just put out a guide for healthcare providers for kratom, which is pretty cool. And I hope they read it.
I'm glad that exists. I'll have to send that around.
And I just had one more question that has nothing to do with anything. What's it like being on CNN?
Well, I had to get up at 5:30 in the morning because I live on the West Coast and CNN's based in New York City. So I was on live TV. I was in Tijuana, Mexico at the time, and very unfortunately, they ran that banner across. So it said live from Tijuana, Mexico, and I was like, man, I really wish you wouldn't have done that. I'm like an economic refugee. At the time I was dating a non-citizen was the primary reason I was out of the country, and it was just so much cheaper to live. I still technically always lived in Oregon, but I was spending a lot of time there. And yeah, they ran that on CNN. It was scary. What you don't see is that the day before I had gone on his radio show, and what I said on the radio was completely different. And I got trolled really heavily, but I read all the comments, I read the trolls, and I was able to understand how people were interpreting what I was saying, and then modify what I was saying to sort of diminish the misinterpretation. And I did that very successfully, even though it was 5:30 in the morning.
That's cool, because it struck me that that's so not the format for complex topics like that you were talking about. And I think it was the homicide by what's it called?
Yeah, drug-induced homicide, drug delivery resulting in death.
Yeah, and it's one of those new things. And why do they always yell on CNN?
I don't know.
He was yelling at. He was a pretty sympathetic guy, though, I thought.
I'm moving into other formats that aren't historically great for talking about complex topics. So I got on TikTok this weekend, and my TikToks about drug-induced homicide kind of went viral, and all of a sudden I have 10,000 followers on TikTok. And so I'm working on how to distill my messages into smaller bites so that a wider audience can hear me, because we're at this weird moment where we're pushing for more compassionate responses to drug use. And also there's all these grieving parents pushing for more punitive responses. And these movements are happening at the same time. So I think my message has never been more important, and I will acclimate myself to all possible mediums to spread it, including TikTok. Dun, dun, dun.
Well, that was a good ending. Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Your writing is just awesome, and I'm going to go in and read more of it. Thank you, Morgan Godvin. I highly recommend reading her stuff at morgangodvin.com, and we have her link tree in the description, as well as a link to the Kratom article. So far, we don't advertise, we don't ask for donations, but we do ask for your support. If you please share this podcast on social media, like, subscribe, comment, rate, review, wherever you listen to podcasts. The music is Risey, the song is Memories of Thailand. Kratom Science Podcast is produced by me, Brian Gallagher, for KratomScience.com. Take care.